All right, more Velikovsky. This is part five. So first of all, if you haven't seen the other four parts, go watch those so you can build up a foundation so you can understand what I'm talking about. If you don't care, that's fine. Watch, I don't care, or listen, whatever. And if you forgot, here's a quick recap. So in this particular part of Worlds in Collision, Velikovsky is describing what happened as the comet Venus. Yes, the planet Venus at this point is a comet, and what it does is that it crosses over Earth's orbit. Now, if you don't care about watching the other ones, what do you mean Venus is a comet? So at this point in time in our history, 1500-ish BC or so, Venus is a danger to Earth. This is where you get all of our ancient cultures talking about Venus being scary, Venus being the destroyer, Venus being plague, all this stuff. Venus brings all of these horrible things down upon everybody. And all cultures have this story. Why? Well, because at this stage in time, the planets are still trying to get into the orbits that we know today. Now, as they're settling into their orbits after a bunch of other cataclysmic stuff happened, we're not going to get into that in this one. As they're settling into their orbits, some of the planets cross each other's orbit. So in this case, while Venus is trying to settle into its orbit, there's a couple of times where it crosses Earth's path twice. Now, it crosses Earth's path actually multiple times, but there's two occasions where Venus becomes extremely deadly. So what happens is, as Venus begins to interact with Earth electromagnetically, remember these two planets, they have electromagnetic fields. Once these fields touch and they see each other, quote unquote, they begin to electrically interact. One of the side effects of this is that they try to become electrically stable, right? That's what electricity does. It tries to find that equilibrium. So you have two charged bodies, the Earth and Venus, and they are now interacting with one another. So what happens is that Venus begins to shed charge. And when Venus sheds charge, it essentially becomes a comet. It gets a cometary tail. It also has all kinds of plasma stuff going on. There's all kinds of crazy events that go on with Venus, but we'll cover that a little later. So at this point on the grand scope of things, what's happening is that Venus is crossing over Earth's orbit. Venus is trying to get to the orbit that we now know of it today. It's trying to find that equilibrium, right? The sun is interacting with it, the Birkeland currents that control all of this, everything is interacting with everything to become electrically stable. The problem is that to become electrically stable, you're going to have planetary bodies sometimes, interact with one another, right? It happens a whole lot earlier on and it becomes less and less frequent, but there is this time in the 1500-ish BC era where Venus and Earth interact, and at an interval of, I believe it's every 52 years or so. 52, I think some have said 54. This is where you get like the Mayan calendar attempting to make, their cycles and all that stuff. And the reason why the Mayan calendar no longer works today is because the problems no longer exist. We'll go into that later as well. Now, what we have covered so far up to this point, or what Velikovsky has covered, and we've added some information to it. Scientific, we always do scientific and historical. That's what I do, not we. I'm not schizo, it's just me. What we'll do next is, how Velikovsky's doing it is he's doing his best to kind of cover all the events, all the different things that would happen if this actually happened in real life. Because if you have two planetary bodies interacting with one another, basically all hell breaks loose. And sure enough, that's exactly what all of our ancient cultures describe. They describe everything that would have happened had these two planetary bodies interacted. The problem is most people, or at least historians and scientists, etc., they don't believe these things is because these things sound fantastical. And they're insane. Make no bones about it. These are absolutely amazing events that transpire. I mean, they're mind-blowing events. Anyway. So Velikovsky continues to paint the picture. This chapter, or this section, is called Earthquake. The Earth, forced out of its regular motion, reacted to the close approach of the body of the comet. A major shock convulsed the lithosphere, and the area of the earthquake was the entire globe. Ipuwer witnessed and survived this earthquake. The towns are destroyed, Upper Egypt has become waste. All is ruin. The residence is overturned in a minute. Only an earthquake could have overturned the residence in a minute. The Egyptian word for to overturn is used in the sense of to overthrow a wall. This was the 10th plague. And Pharaoh rose up in the night, he and all his servants and the Egyptians, and there was a great cry in Egypt, for there was not a house where there was not one dead. Exodus 12:30. Houses fell, smitten by one violent blow. The angel of the Lord passed over the houses of the children of Israel in Egypt, when he smote the Egyptians and delivered our houses. Exodus 12:27. Nogaf, meaning smote, is the word used for a very violent blow, as, for instance, goring by the horns of an ox. The Passover Haggadah says, "The firstborn of the Egyptians didst thou crush at midnight." The reason why the Israelites were more fortunate in this plague than the Egyptians probably lies in the kind of material of which their dwellings were constructed. Occupying a marshy district and working on clay, the captives must have lived in huts made of clay and reeds, which are more resilient than brick and stone. The Lord will pass over the door and will not suffer the destroyer to come smite your houses. An example of the selective action of a natural agent upon various kinds of construction is narrated also in Mexican annals. During a catastrophe accompanied by a hurricane and earthquake, only the people who lived in small log cabins remained uninjured. The larger buildings were swept away. They found that those who lived in small houses had escaped, as well as the newly married couples, whose custom it was to live for a few years in cabins in front of those of their fathers-in-law. In Ages in Chaos, my reconstruction of ancient history, Velikovsky's reconstruction, I shall show that firstborn in the text of the plague is a corruption of chosen. All the flower of Egypt succumbed in the catastrophe. Forsooth, the children of princes are dashed against the walls. The children of princes are cast in the streets. The prison is ruined, wrote Epiwer, and this reminds us of princes in palaces and captives in dungeons who were victims of the disaster. To confirm my interpretation of the 10th plague as an earthquake, which should be obvious from the expression to smite the houses, I find a corroborating passage of Artapanus in which he describes the last night before the Exodus, and which is quoted in Eusebius. There was hail and earthquake by night, so that those who fled from the earthquake were killed by the hail, and those who sought shelter from the hail were destroyed by the earthquake. And at the time all the houses fell in, and most of the temples. Also, Hieronymus, St. Jerome, wrote in an epistle that, in the night in which Exodus took place, all the temples of Egypt were destroyed either by an earth shock or by the thunderbolt. Now, the thunderbolt is important, and that's going to be extremely important in all of the research that we discuss when it comes to all the planets and all the interaction that's going on. Don't forget, everything that's happening here is electromagnetic. You have electricity all over the place. And one of the ways that electricity represents itself, that manifests itself, would be a spark, a lightning, a thunderbolt. This is why we have all these ancient cultures talking about Thor launching thunderbolts or Jupiter launching thunderbolts, etc. These people saw these plasma formations in the sky. And these thunderbolts were no joke. These thunderbolts tore apart the planet. And not just our planet. It absolutely destroyed Mars. Like, that's why you have Valdes Marineris. Anyways, okay, let's keep going. Similarly, in the Midrashim, the 7th plague, the plague of Barad, meteorites, earthquake, fire, meteorites, it is also said that the structures which were erected by the Israelite slaves in the Pithom and Ramses collapsed, or were swallowed by the earth. An inscription which dates from the beginning of the New Kingdom refers to a temple of the Middle Kingdom that was swallowed by the ground at the close of the Middle Kingdom. The head of the celestial body approached very close, breaking through the darkness of the gaseous envelope, and according to the Midrashim, the last night in Egypt was as bright as the noon on the day of the summer solstice. Man, that's insane. So basically, there's a point to where they literally see Venus just right there. And that's it. It's right there. Through all that smoke and all the debris flying at us, as we're flying through that cometary tail. And then I guess I wonder at that point is, would we have entered the coma of Venus? Man, that must be a trip. What if that's what that is? Earth and Venus came so close together that we literally entered the coma, and you saw it right there, and the entire planet just lit up. Man, that's crazy to think about. Woo! All right, okay. He goes on. The population fled. Men flee. Tents are what they make like the dwellers of hills, wrote Ipuwer. The population of a city destroyed by an earthquake usually spends the night in the fields. The book of Exodus describes a hurried flight from Egypt on the night of the 10th plague. A mixed multitude of non-Israelites left Egypt together with the Israelites, who spent their first night in Sukkoth, which are huts. This whole picture he's painting is insane, by the way. Like, what these people must have saw, what they lived through, just absolutely mind-blowing. He goes on. The lightnings lightened the world. The earth trembled and shook. Thou leddest thy people like a flock by the hand of Moses and Aaron. They were brought out of Egypt by a portent which looked like a stretched arm, by a stretched out arm and by great terrors, or with a mighty hand and with the outstretched arm, and with great terribleness, and with signs and with wonders. That's the end of that little section with the earthquake. He'll go on. But really quick, let's just recap a couple of this stuff. So there's a point to where this contact with Venus, they're right there. Venus is literally right there. Now, for you people who are skeptical, stay skeptical. That's good. I'm still skeptical and will ever remain skeptical until I have 100%, everything locked down, which in our historical research, we'll never have at the end of the day. But what Velikovsky is showing here, he's only showing like a little bit of it. He can only fit so much here in the book. The amount of stuff that's going on simultaneously on Earth while this is happening is absolutely insane. So you have earthquakes, you have plasma events in the sky, you have a comet tail that you're inside, so you get darkness. Then there's a point to where you break through the tail, and as far as I can tell, it looks like we get into the coma of Venus. That might not be correct. That's just me I just never thought about it until right now. That could be wrong. But anyways, at some point, we either pull out of the tail enough to where you can see Venus right there, or we're in the coma. The next thing to think about is, how big is Venus in our sky? So that's one of the things that I have not locked down yet. It's there. I think when I first started learning this, I kind of figured it was huge in the sky, right? It rivaled, well, I guess there are some size descriptions. There are definitely things that say, it is bigger than the sun, or it appears bigger than the moon in the sky. Venus is a larger body, so even if it was bigger than Moon, it would still be, further away from us. We're not touching here like that. That's not what's going on. But I wonder how big it actually got. I would be curious to know if we could ever find some sort of documentation, something out there, some historic literature, anything that would actually give us a very detailed size description of Venus. I would love to see that. If anybody has anything like that, yeah, let me know, because I want to know. Anyway, for you skeptical people who are out there, which is me, I don't know how close it gets. So it could be the size of the moon. Let's just pretend it's the size of the moon. If Venus was in our sky at the size of the moon, that would be pretty impressive, right? That would be insane. And all we have to do is to look how bright the moon can get. Venus could easily get that bright. And in fact, we know that Venus's luminosity, what it reflects off the sun, is extremely high. I forget the number. There's a number that it has. But Venus is extraordinarily reflective. So if Venus is really close, and we get to a point where we break out of that tail, whether we're in the coma or we're just getting away from it, I mean, you would have been, it's like getting slapped in the face with a spotlight at that point. But so it's interesting that they have these stories. Now, for you atheists out there who hate the Abrahamic stuff, I'm sorry. Velikovsky is from that perspective. But he does give us perspectives from other cultures, so don't forget that. Just bear with me on this. I know especially for you militant atheists, it can be difficult. But just roll with it. Just put aside your angst. Just listen. And don't forget, these stories were written before the concept of the Bible existed, right? So just remember that. Alright, let's keep going on to the next section. This one is titled 13. At midnight, all the houses of Egypt were smitten. There was not a house where there was not one dead. This happened on the night of the 14th of the month of Aviv. Exodus 12:6, 13:4. This is the night of the Passover. It appears that the Israelites originally celebrated Passover on the eve of the 14th of Aviv. The month of Aviv is called the first month. That was the name of the first month of the Egyptians. What, for the Israelites, became a feast, became a day of sadness and fasting for the Egyptians. The 13th day of the month thouest a very bad day. Thou shalt not do anything on this day. It is the day of the combat which Horus raged with Seth. Now, this is an interesting thing from Velikovsky, and this is where we have our problems with history and trying to identify planets and names. So, in Egyptian mythology, or their history, let's be honest, the Horus and Seth, those are planets. The Egyptians are not calling these guys like, oh, Sky Daddy with a, with a duck bill or a, dog mask or whatever. That's just how they represented them in their writings. When they say Seth or Horus, they're talking about planets. And in this case, they're talking about Seth. Seth is Mercury and Horus is Saturn. So this is what's interesting, because if we're going to say that Horus and Seth were fighting on the 13th day, my question about this particular point that Velikovsky brings out is are these people talking about the 13th day as a relation to what happened way far back in the past when Saturn and Mercury were more larger players in our solar system kerfuffle that was going on? Or is he referencing, or is there an accidental reference to, what is this? The 13th day of the month is very bad. Thou shalt not do it. It is the day of the combat. The Hebrews counted. Yeah. See, this is one of the problems that we run into, is that it's tough to figure out, because translations, those can suck as well, right? So we have to deal with that. But he's referencing Seth and Horus. Seth and Horus being Saturn and Mercury. Saturn and Mercury no longer play a role at this period in time. So I don't know exactly why they would say that. I'm wondering if they're just referencing it as, hey, it's like it was like that back in the day. With Earth and Venus fighting each other back in the day, like Mercury and Saturn did. I don't know. All right, let's go on and see what they say here. All right, the Hebrews counted, and still count, the beginning of the day from sunset. The Egyptians reckoned from sunrise. As the catastrophe took place at midnight, for the Israelites it was the 14th day of the first month. For the Egyptians it was the 13th day. An earthquake caused by contact or collision with a comet must be felt simultaneously all around the world. An earthquake is a phenomenon that occurs from time to time, but an earthquake accompanying an impact in the cosmos would stand out and be recalled as a memorable date. An earthquake is a phenomena that occurs from time to time, but an earthquake accompanying an impact in the cosmos would stand out and be recalled as a memorable date by survivors. When Velikovsky uses the term impact, by the way, he's not talking about Venus like physically smacking Earth. I wish he did not use that word, because he doesn't mean that at all. He's talking about just a contact, or he's talking about a close call, basically. Anyway, just for future, if he ever says that and whatever else we read. Aztecs, like the Egyptians, reckoned the day from sunrise. Here we have, en passant, an answer to the open question concerning the origin of superstition which regards the number 13, and especially the 13th day as unlucky and inauspicious. It is still the belief of many superstitious persons, unchanged through thousands of years and even expressed in the same terms. The 13th day is a very bad day. You shall not do anything on this day. I do not think that any record of this belief can be found dating from before the time of the Exodus. The Israelites did not share this superstition of the evil working number 13th or 14. So that ends that section. So at this point, Velikovsky has painted one hell of a picture, if we go back through all the other parts that we have read, of just absolute chaos and destruction happening everywhere. So what's interesting is that he mentions the Passover. He's literally saying that Venus passed over the planet Earth. All right, so you want to know where the Passover comes from and that concept? There you go. It's very interesting how you can start to look at even, at all these other ancient stories completely differently once you switch out these weird names for planets. Like, these gods are not gods. These whatevers in the sky, they're planets, right? They're bodies in motion in the sky. Suddenly a lot of things start to make sense or have the potential to make sense. Now, I ran into that snag with Seth and Horus. That we have to keep. I'm very curious about how that fits in with everything. Because, really quick, for those of you who aren't familiar with what happened during we'll call it the deluge period, or the Diluvian time. Well, anyway, we'll get into that later. That's a whole other situation. But what this helps illustrate is that as researchers, one of the problems that we actually have to overcome is we need to figure out what names legitimately go with what representation. Too often we have possible historic figures, mixed with a planet or a body in the, something like that. And so it's like, which one of these people referencing? Which one is true? Are they both true? It gets weird. Anyway, so at this point, we have all hell breaking loose on Earth. We have plasma events taking place between Venus and Earth. And in later videos, I'll go over more details because we have way more details nowadays about what was actually going on between the interactions here. Don't forget, Velikovsky, when he wrote this, he was writing at, the 40s and 50s, I believe. So, his information, while all legit, basically, and it's funny, all of his predictions have come true. So he made a lot of scientific predictions, and he just nailed them all out of the park. So that's something to remember if you're a science person, like a hardcore science person. Velikovsky called a lot of stuff that cosmology takes for granted now. So don't forget that. Velikovsky was on it. Alright, so we'll go on later with the next one. Alright.